Hello and welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. It is a pleasure to have Maurice Hamilton here with us, managing partner of Infinivate, and going to be going in depth about Maurice's background, everything that's led to the growth and success of Maurice's initiatives. Maurice, glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. And thought we'd start with your history. I know you've been in Chicago, based in Houston now. We've been talking about your times in El Segundo and all different stages of your career path and start of the origin stories of Infinivate. So thought we'd begin with your path to here today.
Absolutely. And I'm going to probably date myself a little bit here. I've actually been in the industry now for over 35 years. So I go back in the day working for a reseller when the business was really, really small, and we probably had revenues around $10 million a year. And I watched that company grow from me being the seventh employee, and the seventh sales rep and the 21st employee, to watching that company grow to over 10,000 people and over $10 billion over my 20 years there.
Wow. Those are some serious numbers.
It is.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say that the biggest thing about it is I actually predate myself. When I started off as a software developer, that's where I originally began my career. I was actually using punch cards and mainframes, IBM mainframes, System 36 and System 38s, and so I watched the industry grow to a 5 1/4 floppy disk and 3.5-inch hard disk, and I remember the days when we actually had computers that had 20 gigabytes of storage, and we thought that was great. So it's been a lot of changes in the industry over the years.
There you go. I recall some of those computer storage levels. I was a kid at that point, but it's really remarkable to see how things have evolved. And it sounds like you benefit at the forefront of many of those developments.
Yes, it's been a terrific journey.
Excellent. So what were some of the driving forces with your career path to create, to be holding the role that you do at Infinivate?
Really good question. When I go back and look at it, I think that I've always liked to be in an industry where everything's changing, where I always had that vision. I remember, if you think about the early Terminator movie back in early 1980s, and with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know if you remember that movie or not.
Of course.
A lot of people
not too young for that.
Okay, good. I'm not really dating myself too bad. But I remember the technology. I remember the robots. I remember the computer chips. And I kept saying to myself, you know what? I believe that eventually one day we can get there. And because everything was changing, what do they say? Everything changes every year. Everything shrinks a little bit, and everything gets faster and faster year after year. And I remember saying to myself, although I was in sales for many of those years, the early part of the years, and before I gave up the software development piece of it, I remember working with clients and actually seeing that there was a need for clients to actually want their systems to operate faster, more efficient. And I could see that them wanted to really improve their productivity. And I think that those changes actually allowed me to really go back and say, how can I actually do work on my processes? How can I actually work with my sales team? How can I work within my industry, but especially way before I started doing my own business, in order to make sure that I was helping the clients achieve those goals?
Sure. Always that commonality, right? Faster,
Absolutely.
more efficient, understanding the client's needs in detail, and what's really going to be the elements of the conversation that allow them to move forward. Then from there, how do you build? How do you deliver? How do you do continued business with them as part of that development? So being able to structure products, being able to structure processes accordingly.
Right. Exactly.
And at that time, what were some of the specific requests around faster and efficiencies?
A lot of times, and then I think about back at the end of World War II, when Toyota was actually doing the process improvement, and where they actually went back and said, how can we actually make our assembly line faster than Henry Ford? And I think about those different elements of how they can actually go back and actually give the employees the ability to stop the line. They made it so that when you actually start from point A to point B, that car can come off the assembly line much faster than Henry Ford's car can come off the assembly line. And people laughed at that process at first until they figured out that, hey, this process does work. But I correlate that a lot when I'm working with clients, and I'll go back and look at the fundamentals and ask the questions. What happens when you place that order? How long does a person have to wait on hold before someone picks up the phone and actually takes that order? And then once you get that order, how many keystrokes does it take to actually key the order into the system? And then I took it step by step by step. And because in my mind, I'm a process person, and I'll always think about how many key steps can we actually reduce? How many steps can we actually eliminate in that process, that we can still have that process automated, so that by the time that person calls and that order is actually taken, by the time that order ships out the door, that client's actually going to get that product as fast as possible. I mean, here and say the perfect example that everybody can relate to that would be Amazon. You and I can go to Amazon right now, place an order, and there's a chance, even though it's the holiday season, might take a little bit longer, but for the most part, within 1 to 2 days, if that product is available, you're going to have it at your front door. So I kind of like look at that and say, how can I actually help that client in order to help them to be the most efficient as possible? And when they're efficient, the employees are happy. When they're happy, the employees are happy. The ROI is better because they're actually beating out their competitors. And so I like to look at those particular processes and figure, how can we do it faster, better, and in order to make it so that we can actually take care of our clients the best ways possible.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Henry Ford. I remember hearing a story. This may not be verbatim, but he was looking at how much glue was being put into the assembly line at a part, and I think reduced how many drops, 42, and went down to 41. That worked. He came back the next week. Hey, can you put 40? Did 40, came back the next week, and I think it was the high 30s, found it was not doing its job, so went back up one drop, and that's the efficiency. And by one drop of glue being removed, what that meant across the entire production line for that year in terms of revenue and just overall streamlining the process. So that's what I'm hearing by removing keystrokes, where you're basically saying, why is that individual action required? Can we remove it? Oh, we can't after we test it. All right, let's go one more. Let's make sure everything serves a purpose. Let's remove anything that's going to take more time, and especially looking to do this at scale. So across thousands, millions, or more calls, users in a given year, month, day, hour, and being able to have some of those processes to the most streamlined level that they can be.
Right. It does make a difference. And like you said, one drop can save money, but it also makes everything so much efficient. You never know. I mean, that could have produced a car faster. You never know, what that could have done, made the process and quality still stayed up into the utmost levels. But it makes everybody happy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see it with our own processes for launching clients, and we're working on investor marketing campaigns that can, in many cases, be short. So how fast we're able to launch, while of course setting up an effective funnel, the more that we can do for the client. It's not just for us to spend less time. It's, hey, now we're live for longer. We're able to take in more investor prospects, able to have more of those folks going through the funnel, going through some of the educational content. But that can allow for far more performance, far more results. So I'm picturing some of the conversations you were in that period of time and the impact that those builds were able to deliver.
Right. It makes a difference. Even today, when we actually work, because now is my own corporation, so you can imagine I'm a heck of a lot more focused on quality and making sure that we have everything as much as optimized as possible. When somebody actually places an order, say, "Hey, look, we need to send a service technician out to this particular location." Even that particular process, we actually have it down to a science where we want to have somebody dispatch within 2 hours. Not necessarily dispatch, but at least somebody assigned to go out to that particular project, because we want to make sure that we deliver at the highest level, so our client can actually say, "Hey, man, every time I pick up the phone and I call Infinivate, we know we're going to have somebody come out there and fix it right away."
Mhm. And just for listeners who are not as familiar with Infinivate, can you give a broader overview on what you guys do, some of the ethos behind where technology meets humanity, and some of the services that you guys choose to focus on?
Sure. Actually, Jason, that's a really great point. I probably should have started off and talked about that at the beginning of the conversation. So when I look at it, our company, I like to say that we actually solve the CIO, the CTOs, the CSOs or organization problems, and we do it in two different ways. One, they may call us up and say, "Hey, look, we need to optimize our software." Now, that software could be a large software application such as Microsoft Dynamics, it could be SAP, it could be Oracle, it could be Salesforce. And what we do is we actually work with the client, figure out what the pain points are, and then we actually send a bunch of developers in, whatever they need, and say, how can we optimize their operation so that they can get the productivity and efficiency that they're looking for? So that's one element of the business that we actually focus on. The second part of the business is more of the managed services, and we focus on it could be cybersecurity, like cybersecurity assessments. It can actually be physical security. So we work with our clients and install physical security cameras. It can be actually dispatching technicians. So we actually dispatch about almost 800 technicians during the course of this year. So they'll call us up and say, "Hey, look, we have an access point that's down. We have a router that needs to be installed. We have a server that needs to be installed." So anything that has to do with the data center with the client, we can actually send somebody out there and actually fix that, remediate the problem. And we try, that's why I said we try to put in the quality, and we try to put in the efficiency, so we can actually have that customer back up and running as soon as possible.
And I know you are an authority when it comes to cybersecurity. It's it's a frightening place looking at 2023, looking at all of the potential risks that there are. What are some of the key categories of cybersecurity that you're looking at when you're measuring safety and infrastructure that's going to be sustainable?
Sure, there's several different areas. The first element that we look at will be the actual the infrastructure itself. Do they actually have protection for the VPNs? Do they actually have protection on their applications to make sure that the bad actors are not going to be able to tap into those systems? The other thing would be to make sure that their passwords actually meet the criteria that they're looking for password protection. We look at this and say, for example, being if you're an executive of an organization, we want to make sure that you may have a high visibility. You need to make sure that you have an extra layer of protection to make sure somebody doesn't go out there and actually create another Jason Fishman, you know? So we want to make sure that those measurements are in place. So we actually go back and do assessments. We actually make sure that the client is actually compliant with whatever government regulations that may be in their particular industry. We want to make sure that what you really want to do is kind of make your systems as invisible as possible to the actors. You don't want to leave any back doors open. You don't want to leave any kind of back windows open so that these guys can actually crawl into your infrastructure. We want to make sure that we seal it. And if you're actually, for example, going to have your data at your facilities, making sure that nobody can actually tamper into it as much as possible. Or if you're actually going to have your security located on the cloud out there with Google or AWS, you want to make sure that you put in the protocols to make sure that you're hidden as much as possible, so people can't hack what they can't see. So if you're actually as invisible as possible, we want to make sure that you're using the optimized protection to protect your infrastructure.
So, based upon that term, invisible, You mentioned various different softwares, platforms, ecosystems that you're building on. What's ideal? If someone's starting from scratch, what is the recommendation that you would have for them in terms of cybersecurity
Mhm.
for that invisibility factor?
I would say the basic information would be one, to make sure that your physical security, your physical machines are running the latest BIOS out there. A lot of times, if you actually have the BIOS chips that's the latest and greatest, and you can do patchwork or software upgrades to them, that can actually help keep your system as much as possible kind of hidden from the most obvious bad actors that are out there. The second thing, and you can actually have I mean, I'm not going to name any software packages, but you can have several different software packages out there protecting your systems. But you need to make sure that you have the patchwork and that you're actually getting those updates on a daily basis. You want to make sure that the people not only that actually have those devices, that application covering their devices, but they know what the rules are. So you want to make sure that people aren't going to I'm trying to think of an application, but I don't want to say a name, but
Sure,
going
sure.
to some applications that are out there that can actually, where so a lot of people can actually play on the dark web, that can actually, tap into your system. Because the best way, and that wasn't I say a common way that a lot of people actually get to your systems, it could be through a third party. You want to make sure that any third party company that you're working with, that they actually have the applications on their systems. So you want to trust but verify that information. Say, hey, look, I've done the utmost to make sure that my hardware is protected, to make sure that my software is protected. I'm making sure that we actually have all kind of different measurements in place so people can't tap into our system, even physically, like with biometrics or even fingerprints, or even control like a gate access. If you have a facility, so people can actually sneak into it. But you also want to make sure that the third party vendors, that their infrastructure is just as protected as yours. Yeah.
Third
Those are three
party.
or four different ways. Yeah, the basic ways to start off with.
Yeah, it's such a good point because we see situations where we're double checking our team members, but then we have to send, share, invite third parties with the clients or various types of groups that we work with uh, into that conversation, and those could be vulnerabilities. Perhaps I know for us and some of the extra layers in there what we look at to make sure we're safe, but it's such a good thing to point out. I'm also hearing just the latest. So for physical, for software, making sure the updates are there, making sure everything is, caught up and ready to go in real time.
Absolutely. Yep. Every preventative measure that you take can actually help you in the long run.
So as part of investor marketing, we've been able to work in blockchain
Hmm.
across various capacities into Web3. And I know Web2, Web3 gets miscategorized at times. What are your thoughts towards, multi-ledger systems, distributed ledger? What are what's your lens on that side of the digital world?
I love it. I think that blockchain is something that's going to happen in the future. And I think one of the main reasons, and I can vouch this by an article I read specifically in the Wall Street Journal this week, and saying with some really large corporations, I'll say this because it's public news, like UPS, and saying when you actually go back and look at supply chain, and we actually go back and look at the chain of custody, I mean, that blockchain is just like such a wonderful and marvelous way to actually go back out there. So you can actually you can do a transfer of ownership. You can actually get paid faster. People can actually track their shipments. There's so many different advantages when you use the ledger with it. So I think it's a great thing. I think some of the apprehension that's involved with it right now, especially with the really, really large organization, is that there's so many different moving parts with it, that you have all these vendors, you have all these partners, you have the finance companies, you have the banks. You have to make sure that everybody is actually fine and tuned with when it comes to the blockchain. And I think that there's so much money involved with it, and there's so much complexity involved with it, and there are a lot of man hours involved with when it comes to the blockchain. And I don't think that I think that based on the article that I read to confirm my thoughts, that people aren't moving as fast because there's so many different moving parts to it. Now, in my opinion, do I think that we'll actually eventually get there? Absolutely. I think that that's a really, really great way to go because your data is encrypted and we can keep some of these bad actors out of everything because if you know that you got that particular special key and other people aren't going to have it, it does make a big difference there. So make a long story short, I do believe that we will go to an environment where we actually will be using blockchain. And I know we have a lot of things going on with cryptocurrency right now, but I believe that we will get to the point. I don't know if it's US coin or whatever coin we're going to use for it, that we will be using digital currency for a lot of different aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. And I've been of that same mindset since 2017. And I've seen resistance in many regards, and reflecting different markets, particularly some lines of thinking that came out in 2018, where it almost made more sense if you were speaking to enterprise companies, not to mention the word blockchain, and to be able to talk about the tech, but really leave that under the hood so that there were no misconceptions. And then with the events in 2022, crash of different exchanges, lack of trust that came to follow, impact felt across the entire industry. I know it's building mode right now, but it can be difficult to move past that stigma. So there's cryptocurrency and NFTs and some of the things that are questionable that have occurred there, casting a shadow in many respects towards blockchain technologies.
Right, and I agree with you 100%, Jason. I still believe because we talk about the enterprise customers and it may be a lot more difficult for them, but I still think that there's a market for that mid space. That if you're a manufacturing company and you're receiving your products from 3 or 4 different countries and you have to have your products shipped by boat or some kind of carrier to get here, I still think there's advantages of actually about smaller organizations to be able to capitalize and utilize that the blockchain. I still think it's possible. And I think that once the dust settles, because we have a lot of things up in the air right now, that you will start to begin to see a lot more people start to utilize blockchain in their environments. I do believe that would happen.
Absolutely. That adoption, that trust. And, in many ways, I think it's even moving past the word blockchain, Web3, and really just having it as part of almost standard advanced, but built, more normalized builds at that point.
I agree. And you mentioned Web3. Just think about the advantages of Web3. I mean, Web3 has a bunch of different things with it, so we can have a conversation just on Web3 by itself. But I think that eventually we may get to a point, and there are some countries that's doing it right now, where you actually own your data. If you own your data and you actually control who actually has access to your data, I think that's going to make a big difference with cybersecurity as well. Because if people can't get your information and you don't allow your information to be accessed by a bunch of different people, you don't put it out there and you control it. I mean, I think it's going to be a game changer. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Web 3.0.
Absolutely. It's so funny. I've been using computers myself since the early 90s. You mentioned well before that. And we're still at these infancy stages, whether we're talking about digital as a whole, or even then in blockchain and learning all the different ways to protect ourselves with cybersecurity and our data and applications of it. Coming from an advertising background, I can tell you about targeting and how it's served to really create a better experience for the consumer by many publishers and platforms, especially in the mobile space. And others that are just using that data as a monetization model. So there's an integrity component, but really, I think the next 5-10 years are going to be interesting to see all the rules that we're able to build so that it's an optimal experience for everyone involved.
I agree. And I like that because I know that's a really comprehensive question and you mentioned the word data. And I think about that data, so who owns that data? And I think that one of the critical aspects with a lot of organization is data. I mean, we have our people. We all know that people are very important, but your data is golden. What you do with that data and how you actually utilize that data, that's going to actually help you grow your organization, not only just today, but in the future, that's key. So I think that there's going to be a lot of governments maybe involved with the data, when it comes to that. And I think that's what caused a lot of kludginess with it. And it caused a lot of problems with it, because now you have to have that debate of how do you control that? Who manages that? Who actually makes the rules for controlling data? So it should be interesting to see what happens, especially in the next few years on how we actually go about well, not just with organizations, but how the government comes to play, especially here in the United States with data.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to remove some of the fears around it in regards to advertising and marketing, and then have more of a focus on safety, and some of the ways that the wrong audience stayed in the wrong hands is extremely dangerous. So I picture a world, let's say for mobile platforms and their advertising, which is their primary revenue model, a system that allows users to choose, hey, this is what I want to see. This is what I do not want to see. I do want the freemium version, but here's what I want my experience to be tailored towards.
Right.
Looking at all sides of the table, because I used to build ad products, that is then more valuable to the advertiser, to the marketer, and I believe that advertising revenue does a very good thing for major media publishers, for majority of publishers, digital, what have you. So I think just removing some of the misconceptions, being able to talk about the purpose and the value can allow for more sharing of some data. And of course, data is a broad word, more protection for things that you absolutely do not want shared.
You're right. And you said that key word, data, those two key words there, the user experience.
Yes.
The user, if I'm a user, I know what I like and I know what I want to be exposed to. But if I can actually create my own user experience where I don't want to see this, I don't want to see this. Why do they keep showing me this over? And I told you I don't like it. Unsubscribe me. But if it's something that I want to see, that user experience is actually going to make it beneficial for everybody who's actually selling that particular product or service. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Spot on.
So data can be shared, and I think to some extent should be shared for the right purposes. Right. And again, other private information, extra layers of protection and penalties around, any breaking of that code for any bad actors.
Yeah.
And when looking at cybersecurity, when looking at digital safety, when looking at everything that you're doing with the organizations that you're a part of, where do you envision this all going? 2025, 2030, later years, and from your experience going back to the floppy disk days, or even the punch cards, where do you see this whole industry going 5-10 years out?
Mm-hmm. I see, especially within the next 5 years, I think it's kind of hard to push anything past 5 years because everything is evolving and changing so fast. But I've interviewed and I met with a lot of chief security officers, chief technology officers, chief information officers, and even CIOs of the companies. I think the number one elements besides economic type conditions, the number one element that keeps those guys up at night is cybersecurity. I think that when they think about cybersecurity for it, it's always the forefront, because you always are thinking about what you can actually do to make sure that you're protecting your infrastructure, your intellectual property, your employees, your vendors, your customers with your infrastructure, because you are the gateway to a lot of other people. I think that because there's such a huge concern with it, and I think that the vendors, especially like computer hardware, now they're actually writing it so that the computer can't, people can't tap into that particular infrastructure. They're looking at going down to the bias, level and see what can we do to actually make it so that people can't touch this. And I think that the more and more we see companies come out there, like especially like cloud companies like AWS and Google, and they're putting in preventative measures where the data is so invisible to even, they can't even see what's there. If they can't see what's there, then you know that the bad actors and nobody else can actually get that information too. But I think that the evolution and the technology is advancing so fast in those particular areas. And I think that as long as people continue to keep their software updated, and I think that it's just going to come out with more and greater encryption for the users of security. And security and data, that I think it's going to evolve tremendously in the next 3 to 5 years. So I do see that happening on both the hardware part of it and the software part of it, especially the hardware, because now everything's pretty much driven by software upgrades. So it's just like with the Tesla car, they'll send you upgrade through your car while it's charging. And I think that with the software packages, you can have your infrastructure set up that you can still get upgrades with your hardware, even while you're not in the office.
It's going to be exciting, and like you said, every few years, it's radically different. Can't even project past 5, so it's going to be interesting and fun to watch, and probably just feel normal at the time.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right.
And Maurice, you've been very successful in building Infinivate, all past projects throughout your career. If you were packaging some of your insights so that listeners could take action, what would you recommend for them to test out for their own businesses, for their own model, or even towards their own cybersecurity?
If I would go back and name it, it's like name a couple different elements that I think are very successful, that have been very successful to me, and I would definitely go back and say, if I could have done this different 3 years ago, what would be some of the elements I would look at? The first one would be, and it's not even with the cybersecurity part of it, it's actually relationships. And I think that the relationships that people actually have out there, with not only with the vendor partners and the relationships they actually have with consumers, it does make a difference. I mean, we were all tested in 2020 when we actually had the pandemic hit, and those relationships became key, because you couldn't have that eyeball to eyeball conversation for it. But the people that had those key relationships with other individuals, that relationship expanded and went to another level. But I still think that if you actually have that relationship, you can build that trust factor into your business model. It does make a difference. And the other thing I would look at, let's say, would be in the cybersecurity part of it. I've seen a lot. Even with our own company, we've experienced different people trying to get into our systems and doing different things for it. And I would say that people should definitely keep cybersecurity as the first and foremost thing that as any leader or organization should keep an eye on. That should be a daily aspect of something that, if you don't have the expertise, that is something that is well worth it to go back out there and hire the expertise. Because if it's one of those situations, I always say, pay me now, pay me later. Because if you don't do it, and all of a sudden one day you log into your systems, you can't get into your system, and this person over here can't get into their system, and this person over here can't get into their system, and you saying, what's going on? You open up your email and you got a ransom letter from somebody. That's not a good thing. that could be the most horrific letter that any leader of an organization can actually reach, because now you're actually being a victim of ransomware. Because you should invest and actually go out there, hire the expertise, and make sure that you are hardening your systems as much as possible. So I would say the cybersecurity one, the relationship would be the other one. And I know that you guys do a lot with marketing, and I would say my third thing would be what worked. And I'm not an expert in this area. I can only tell you as the leader of my organization, what worked 5 years ago, what worked 3 years ago, what worked a year ago isn't necessarily working today. You have got to stay on top of your marketing. I 5 years ago, if you asked me about social media, I would say, bah humbug. I don't like social media. I'll keep in touch with my friends, whatever the case would be, but I'm not a social media person. I'm still not a social media person, but I know that it's critical for me to have social media to run my business now, So I would definitely tell people that you have got to stay on top of it. You got to see what's working, what's trending with your clients, know what your customers like. And like you said, test. If you see something that's working for it, you got to scale that. You got to scale that bad boy to the umpteenth level to make sure that, hey, I've got something that's working here. Stick with it, make it fly, make it run.
Well said. That marketing advice, relationships, cybersecurity, can't agree with you more. And I've had clients run into those ransomware, letters. I won't even tell you how sensitive of industries they were in. I glad we were able to point at that. The relationships I know have been instrumental in my own experience with my own career, with my company, with my clients, and how they are able to grow what they're doing and see larger success based on how those relationships and their network grows. But the marketing Like you said, we worked 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 1 year ago, and how fast time goes. If I,
Right.
mention 2017, 2018, doesn't feel like 5 years ago. Meanwhile, it was, and the marketing is outdated at that point. 3 years ago, a year ago, I could tell you about some of the pixel obstacles and how we've had to craft our strategies around that. What some of the lack of trust around different news sources has created in the past 12 months, and what we've had to do to show more social proof and third-party validation.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, channels that we kind of laughed at a few years back are now very important. And if clients are not looking at this, they're going to miss opportunities to scale. And I've found, the market share is sitting with groups that are scaling. They're doing it at higher volumes.
Absolutely. You don't want your company to be another Blockbuster, J.C. Penney's, or Montgomery Ward. Where are those companies at today?
There's a pop-up bar for Blockbuster in Los Angeles, but I think one location in Northern California, but that's about it. And they were very big at one point. It was surprising to see them lose market share, and could give many other examples of groups that were testing and they were seeing performance. They just did not lean into it. What about optimizations, though? There's so many great podcasts out there. There's so much great information and content. If a founder is putting together a program towards their own growth, and they then run into obstacles, even just playing off your three recommendations, relationship, cybersecurity, marketing, they're running into an obstacle with their cybersecurity. It's not holding up the way they wanted to. Maybe not a severe issue, but there's some puncturing happening. Their marketing is not quite working right out of the gate, or just their efforts towards the relationships and some of the outreach that they're doing are not panning out. How can you go back to the drawing board? How can you optimize? I find this to be the big differentiator for many leaders, because obstacles will occur. So what do you do to optimize when experiencing?
I think that's a really great question, and I since we're talking about marketing here, I have to go back and say, and I've taken this from experience myself. Go back and seek the professional help. Talk to the experts. Find out what they're testing. Find out what's successful, and actually talk to some other people and peers in your industry. Join those community boards and actually say, hey, look, what did you try this, and try to get their opinion. And I always say that I don't know how to make a rubber tire, but you know what? I can actually go to Goodyear or something like that and say, hey, I want to make a rubber tire, whatever the case will be, and they can give me some advice on, hey, so good luck with it. You're not going to be our competitor, but we'll tell you how you can put everything together, But just go talk to people, just talk to the experts and actually seek professional help, and let these guys actually give you some direction, and then question it, and go back and look at this and say, why do you think that this is best? Test it. To go out there and test it, make sure that you're testing and say, hey, look, I'm not going to go with the full package that you're offering here, but let's test it. If it's successful, then I'll go with you. That would be my advice for people. And I apply that same advice when I actually work with clients, and when it comes to automating their facilities and automating their warehouse and automating, for example, we're working with the client right now, a big logistics company, and saying, well, how can we actually help you? How do we make your systems better? Let's put a gate. Let's control who actually gets them to your facilities. You don't want that guy climbing over the fence at 2:30 in the morning and he just walk into the property. If he's got a 9-foot tall fence, it's going to make it difficult for him to get over it, and then actually get whatever he can to get back out. And then put 2 or 3 different barriers of entry in order to get to that facility. The greater the chance that the barriers that you put up, the more difficult it's going to be for the regular Joe criminal to actually get into the facilities. Same thing with marketing, and I would go. That would be my advice.
Absolutely, and I know many are discouraged for seeking help. I can just add to that there are friendly people in these industries. I look at it as a responsibility to be able to speak to groups about investor marketing. My team welcomes these conversations at any point. I know experts in legal, finance, you name it, that are open and will give this information. And then, if it makes more sense, and I think to what you're pointing to, Maurice, engage them. Don't shy away from it. I think back to that ransom letter recommendation where, you could save a few bucks today, but if you have an issue tomorrow or even in 3 years because of the cut corners, it's going to be far more costly and possibly even detrimental at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
what about scaling? You talked about scaling and how important it is. You don't want to be, a blockbuster, as you mentioned. What are some tips towards scale? What are some of the success stories that you've seen that listeners can take a piece from?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that, and I think that being an entrepreneur, you're actually a more, if you see something that's working, you're gonna. I'm not gonna say you're gonna bet the farm on it, but you're gonna say, hey, look, let's put some more money. Let's bet a little bit heavy on this. And I think when it comes to scaling with the organization, there's a couple ways you could do it. You can actually do it organically when it comes to scaling. You can actually do it by adding different practices to your organization. Oh, can you hear me, Jason? Okay. You can do it organically. You can actually do it by adding additional practices to your organization. Or if you actually have something that you've tested and it seems to be working pretty good for it, you go out there and scale it. And my definition of scaling would be, okay, I tried this with 25 different customers, and here are all the parameters that they fit in this particular category. Okay, let me see if I can actually double that and see if I can still get the same results. And I've learned now, if it's actually working in one particular part of the country, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in another part of the country or it's going to work over here. But if you actually find a group of people and they all meet those demographics that you're looking at, and those matrix all add up there, go out there, increase it 10%, increase it 20%, increase it 30%, and then ride it as long as you can until you see that the numbers are starting to go, that you hit that peak and you start to go the other direction,
Mm-hmm.
And then actually go back with the other areas and say, hey, look, let me go back and figure out why these areas didn't scale the same way that this particular area scaled. So that's what I mean by scaling. I said, when you see something that's working with it, don't put everything into it. But my thing is to actually go, if it's working, invest more into it and see if you can actually scale it either organically or by adding additional practices or putting a little bit more money into it because you see that it's actually working.
Absolutely. I learned it from advertising and apply it to entrepreneurship, where I'm seeking out pockets of performance. What is working, I want to do more of. What's not, I want to optimize. I want it to get its full shot, but if it's not happening, eventually phase it out. And with advertising, if we're seeing a 1% click-through rate, 99% of the audience, 99% of what we're doing is not working. Meanwhile, that 1% is all we need, because we could do it at enough scale to where that 1%, and it's higher on some channels. It's an average of different channels, but that 1%, it could be thousands of conversions and in a given day, let alone month, week, what have you. So I'm playing for that traffic, by the way, that the traffic could then convert at a 2% based on Google says an average conversion rate is 2.35%. So if I applied these numbers to anything else, I would say it does not work. And I've made content around this. Marketing does not work. You're certainly not going to, I could throw a bunch of silly analogies out there. You're not going to take off on a plane that lands 2% of the time, or even on time 2% of the time.
Right.
But you're searching for those pockets, and once you're able to do so, you could find a winning scenario, and one that, as you mentioned, if you're leaning into, if you're scaling, if you're putting 20% more, 30% up here, up there, keep growing. It's remarkable how these things can compound and snowball. And of course, there's those sayings out there where if you're not doing it, another group in your space will be, and they're going after those same audiences. So you have to be not aggressive to where you're being, you're having negative actions towards other groups, but aggressive to where you're actively playing for those audiences.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, Maurice, this has been a very insightful conversation for me, and I'm sure listeners are taking notes along with me here. I already have a full page. If if anybody's looking to get more, what would be the best ways to get in contact with you with Infinivate? And what are some final thoughts that you want to leave viewers, listeners with?
Sure. I would say the best way to reach me is actually at info@infinivate.com. So it's info at infinavate.com. That would be the best way to kind of contact me in that particular manner. The And I would have to say, if I my thoughts with people would be, I think we talked about some really good topics here. We talked about the cybersecurity. We talked about the relationships, and we talk about scalability. My thoughts would be, and I have to go back and say, I want everybody to stay in business. And I have to go back and say, if I want to think about technical terms of it, go out there and make sure that you're doing something with security, making sure that you're seeking companies like myself for assessments, for example, to make sure that you actually have your systems as hard as possible, to make sure that you don't have the maximum amount of protection that you can, and to make sure that so you don't have to go back and report to a whole bunch of different stakeholders, employees, and vendors, and even a government that's saying you failed to meet those commitments. So I would say that would be my greatest advice to everybody else. And like everything else, where I learned along the way here, the value of relationships would be key. And I think that I value all the partners I work with. I value all the relationships I have with the different people out there, because those relationships are key to my business, also to my business and my personal life. And I think that people should really learn to value the relationships to the highest levels possible.
I can agree with you more, Maurice, and definitely recommend for listeners to get in contact with you. To your point about relationships, build on there, go through, get an assessment, look at the safety. And I love how you hold the values across all areas of your life and your career. Very well said.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Great conversation on my part as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to hop on. It's been a pleasure. And want to thank listeners as well for tuning in. We'll see everybody next time.